He smuggled heroin inside the coffins of dead American soldiers returning from Vietnam. He cut out the middlemen and bought directly from Southeast Asian suppliers, making his heroin purer and cheaper than the mafia's. At his peak, Frank Lucas was making $1 million per day. This is the true story of America's most innovative drug kingpin. Frank Lucas didn't start as a drug lord. He was a poor kid from North Carolina who moved to Harlem and became a driver for the legendary gangster Bumpy Johnson. But when Bumpy died in 1968, Frank saw an opportunity that would change the drug trade forever. He realized the Italian Mafia controlled heroin distribution because they controlled the supply chain. Frank decided to go directly to the source and cut out every middleman. That decision made him a millionaire and a legend. Frank Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in LaGrange, North Carolina, during the Great Depression. His family was desperately poor. They lived in a shack with no electricity or running water. Frank's parents were sharecroppers, trapped in a system designed to keep black families in perpetual poverty. When Frank was 6 years old, he witnessed something that changed him forever. The Ku Klux Klan murdered his 13-year-old cousin Obadiah in front of his family for allegedly looking at a white woman the wrong way. They beat him to death with baseball bats, while the sheriff watched and did nothing. Frank's mother grabbed him and his siblings and they ran hiding in the woods for days. That trauma shaped Frank's worldview. He learned that the system wasn't designed to protect people like him. The law didn't apply equally. Authority figures were often the enemy. If he wanted to survive and prosper, he'd have to operate outside the system entirely. As a teenager, Frank got into constant trouble. He fought, stole, and ran with street gangs. His mother, desperate to save him, sent him to New York City to live with relatives in Harlem. Frank arrived in 1946 at age 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back. Harlem in the 1940s was vibrant and dangerous. Jazz clubs, numbers runners, prostitutes, drug dealers, and gangsters controlled the streets. Frank was immediately drawn to that world. He started as a small-time hustler, stealing anything he could sell. But Frank was smart and observant. He watched how real power operated in Harlem. In the early 1960s, Frank caught the attention of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most powerful black gangster in Harlem. Bumpy saw potential in Frank and made him his driver and bodyguard. For nearly 6 years, Frank learned from Bumpy. He learned about loyalty, respect, discipline, and the drug business. Bumpy treated Frank like a son. Frank Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in LaGrange, North Carolina, during the Great Depression. His family was desperately poor. They lived in a shack with no electricity or running water. Frank's parents were sharecroppers, trapped in a system designed to keep black families in perpetual poverty. When Frank was 6 years old, he witnessed something that changed him forever. The Ku Klux Klan murdered his 13-year-old cousin Obadiah in front of his family for allegedly looking at a white woman the wrong way. They beat him to death with baseball bats while the sheriff watched and did nothing. Frank's mother grabbed him and his siblings, and they ran hiding in the woods for days. That trauma shaped Frank's worldview. He learned that the system wasn't designed to protect people like him. The law didn't apply equally. Authority figures were often the enemy. If he wanted to survive and prosper, he'd have to operate outside the system entirely. As a teenager, Frank got into constant trouble. He fought, stole, and ran with street gangs. His mother, desperate to save him, sent him to New York City to live with relatives in Harlem. Frank arrived in 1946 at age 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back. Harlem in the 1940s was vibrant and dangerous. Jazz clubs, numbers runners, prostitutes, drug dealers, and gangsters controlled the streets. Frank was immediately drawn to that world. He started as a small-time hustler, stealing anything he could sell, but Frank was smart and observant. He watched how real power operated in Harlem. In the early 1960s, Frank caught the attention of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most powerful black gangster in Harlem. Bumpy saw potential in Frank and made him his driver and bodyguard. For nearly 6 years, Frank learned from Bumpy. He learned about loyalty, respect, discipline, and the drug business. Bumpy treated Frank like a son. On July 7, 1968, Bumpy Johnson collapsed and died of a heart attack in a Harlem restaurant. Frank was devastated. He'd lost his mentor and father figure. But Bumpy's death also created a power vacuum in Harlem. Everyone expected the Italian Mafia to take full control of the heroin trade. Frank had other plans. Frank studied the heroin supply chain. Italian Mafia families controlled distribution in New York, but they didn't control the source. They bought heroin from suppliers in Europe who bought from producers in Southeast Asia. Each middleman took a cut, driving prices up and quality down. By the time heroin reached Harlem streets, it was heavily diluted and expensive. The Vietnam War was raging in 1968. Thousands of American soldiers were dying in Southeast Asia, right where the world's best opium poppies grew. The Golden Triangle, where Burma, Laos, and Thailand meet, produced the purest heroin on earth. Frank had a crazy idea. What if he went directly to the source? Frank used his savings and borrowed money to fly to Bangkok in 1968. He didn't speak the language. He didn't have connections, but Frank had confidence and a willingness to take risks. He traveled to remote villages in the Golden Triangle, meeting with opium farmers and heroin producers who supplied the Chinese triads. Frank made a bold proposition. Instead of selling to Chinese middlemen who sold to Italian middlemen who sold to American distributors, sell directly to him. He'd pay cash, buy in bulk, and arrange his own transportation. The suppliers were skeptical but intrigued. Frank's offer meant higher profits for them and eliminated layers of uncertainty. Frank sealed his first deal. He bought 132 kilograms of pure heroin for $4,200 per kilogram, about $560,000 total. That same heroin, by the time it reached New York streets after being cut multiple times, would be worth over $30 million. Frank had just figured out how to become rich. Frank's genius wasn't just buying directly from the source. It was the smuggling method. U.S. Customs heavily monitored commercial flights from Southeast Asia. Drug-sniffing dogs checked luggage. Federal agents watched known smuggling routes. Traditional methods were too risky. Frank found a loophole that was both brilliant and horrifying. Thousands of American soldiers were dying in Vietnam. Their bodies were shipped home in military coffins through military transport. These shipments received minimal inspection out of respect for the fallen. Frank bribed corrupt U.S. military personnel and South Vietnamese officials to hide heroin inside the coffins and body bags of dead soldiers. The heroin would be packed inside the coffins alongside or sometimes inside the bodies themselves. When the coffins arrived at military bases in the United States, Frank's people working on the bases would retrieve the heroin before the bodies were sent to families. It was a desecration of fallen soldiers, but it was also virtually impossible to detect. Frank branded his heroin Blue Magic. It was 100% pure heroin, far more potent than anything else on the streets. Most heroin sold in Harlem was only 5 to 10% pure, cut heavily with quinine, lactose, and other additives. Blue Magic was so pure that Frank could cut it multiple times, and it would still be stronger than competitors' products. He sold Blue Magic for less than the competition while making higher profits because he'd eliminated all the middlemen. Drug dealers across Harlem scrambled to get Frank's product. Users demanded it because it was stronger and cheaper. Within months, Frank Lucas controlled the heroin trade in Harlem. Frank's operation was sophisticated. He kept detailed financial records. He paid his workers well and demanded loyalty. He avoided flashy displays of wealth initially, learning from Bumpy Johnson to move quietly. He bought properties, businesses, and real estate to launder money. He treated his operation like a legitimate business. By the early 1970s, Frank Lucas was making approximately $1 million per day. His organization employed dozens of family members and trusted associates. His brothers and cousins worked as enforcers, distributors, and money launderers. Frank kept the operation tight-knit, trusting only people connected by blood or long-time loyalty. Frank diversified beyond heroin. He invested in nightclubs, restaurants, apartment buildings, and car dealerships. He owned properties across Harlem, the Bronx, and New Jersey. On paper, he was a legitimate businessman. In reality, everything was funded by drug money. But Frank started making mistakes that would eventually destroy him. Despite his early discipline about staying low-key, success went to his head. He bought a $140,000 home in New Jersey. He purchased expensive cars, including a Mercedes-Benz and multiple Cadillacs. He wore custom-made suits and a $50,000 chinchilla coat. The chinchilla coat was Frank's biggest mistake. In 1971, Frank wore it to the Muhammad Ali vs. Joe Frazier fight of the century at Madison Square Garden. He sat ringside, surrounded by celebrities and millionaires. A detective named Richie Roberts noticed Frank and became suspicious. Who was this black man nobody recognized, dressed wealthier than mafia bosses, sitting in prime seats? Roberts started investigating Frank Lucas. He discovered Frank wasn't on anyone's radar. The FBI and NYPD had no files on him. While authorities focused on the Italian Mafia, Frank had built a massive drug empire in plain sight. Roberts formed a specialized task force dedicated to taking down Frank Lucas. Meanwhile, Frank's paranoia grew. He suspected betrayal everywhere. He became violent and ruthless with anyone he thought was stealing or informing. He carried guns constantly. His brothers were even more brutal, torturing and killing suspected snitches. The violence brought more attention to Frank's organization. Detective Richie Roberts was an unusual cop. He had a reputation for honesty in a corrupt police department. Once, Roberts and his partner found nearly $1 million in cash in a drug dealer's car. In 1970s New York, most cops would have split the money and reported finding nothing. Roberts turned in every dollar, which made him a pariah among corrupt officers but also made him trustworthy to prosecutors. Roberts became obsessed with Frank Lucas. He built a case slowly, gathering evidence of Frank's heroin distribution network. He documented Frank's properties, businesses, and associates. He ran surveillance on Frank's brothers. He flipped low-level dealers who confirmed blue magic came from Frank's organization. The breakthrough came from Frank's own supplier network. Federal agents in Southeast Asia discovered the Coffins smuggling operation. They arrested corrupt military personnel who confessed to working with Frank. With evidence of the smuggling route secured, prosecutors had enough for a major case. On January 28, 1975, federal agents and NYPD officers executed a massive coordinated raid. They hit Frank's home in New Jersey, his properties in Harlem, and the homes of his brothers and associates. They seized drugs, weapons, and cash. They arrested Frank Lucas and dozens of members of his organization. Frank was caught with $584,000 in cash hidden in the walls of his home. Agents found detailed records of his operation. They seized properties worth millions. The evidence was overwhelming. Frank Lucas was facing life in prison without parole under harsh federal drug trafficking laws. Frank Lucas was facing life in federal prison. At 44 years old, he was looking at dying behind bars. His empire was destroyed. His money was seized. His family members were arrested. Frank had two choices: stay loyal to the criminal code and rot in prison, or cooperate with the government. Frank chose survival. He agreed to become a federal informant. What happened next shocked law enforcement across New York. Frank didn't just give up other drug dealers. He gave up dirty cops. Lots of them. Frank testified that he'd been paying off over 100 NYPD officers, including high-ranking detectives and supervisors. He named names, provided dates, and showed exactly how the corruption worked. His testimony led to the indictment and conviction of numerous police officers. The scandal rocked the NYPD and exposed how deeply corruption had penetrated the department. Frank also gave up Italian Mafia members, rival drug dealers, and corrupt politicians. His cooperation was so valuable that prosecutors offered him a deal. Instead of life without parole, Frank Lucas received 70 years in prison. He would be eligible for parole after serving a fraction of that sentence. In 1981, after serving only 5 years, Frank Lucas was released from prison. His cooperation had been so valuable that he'd earned an early release, but the streets had changed. Frank's reputation was destroyed. He was labeled a snitch, the worst thing you can be in the criminal world. Nobody would work with him. Nobody trusted him. Frank tried to go straight. He lived quietly in New Jersey, but in 1984, he was arrested again for drug trafficking. Old habits died hard. This time he received 7 years. He was released in 1991 and finally stayed clean, working menial jobs and living off his wife's salary. Frank Lucas spent his later years as a footnote in criminal history. But in 2007, everything changed when Ridley Scott directed American Gangster, starring Denzel Washington as Frank and Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts. The film grossed over $266 million worldwide and made Frank Lucas a household name. The movie dramatized Frank's story, making him seem more powerful and sophisticated than he actually was. Frank loved the attention. He gave interviews claiming his operation was even bigger than portrayed, saying he'd made over $50 million and was worth far more than documented. Prosecutors and investigators disputed many of Frank's claims. The truth is complicated. Frank Lucas was absolutely a major heroin distributor in 1970s Harlem. He did buy directly from Southeast Asian suppliers. He did use creative smuggling methods. His Blue Magic brand was real and dominant in Harlem. But Frank also exaggerated extensively. Some investigators believe he inflated his wealth and influence dramatically. The coffin smuggling story itself has been questioned. While Frank definitely smuggled heroin from Southeast Asia and may have used military connections, some DEA agents involved in the case say the coffin story was overblown and that Frank used multiple smuggling methods, including commercial airlines and shipping containers. What's undisputed is that Frank Lucas revolutionized drug trafficking by eliminating middlemen. His direct sourcing model became standard practice for major drug organizations. Mexican cartels later used the same principle, going directly to cocaine producers in Colombia rather than using intermediaries. Frank Lucas died on May 30, 2019, at age 88. He'd lived long enough to see himself portrayed as a cultural icon, which disturbed many of his victims and the communities destroyed by his heroin. His story became romanticized, which obscured the real damage he caused. Frank Lucas was a poor kid from North Carolina who witnessed the KKK murder his cousin. He moved to Harlem with nothing and became the driver for a legendary gangster. When his mentor died, Frank saw an opportunity and took a risk that changed drug trafficking forever. He flew to Southeast Asia, made direct deals with heroin producers, and smuggled pure heroin back to America using military transport and the coffins of dead soldiers. He branded his product Blue Magic, sold it cheaper than competitors while maintaining higher quality, and became a millionaire making $1 million per day at his peak. But Frank's success came from selling poison to his own community. His heroin destroyed thousands of lives in Harlem. Families were ruined. Children lost parents to addiction. Crime skyrocketed. While Frank got rich, the neighborhood he claimed to represent suffered immeasurably. His downfall came from his own ego. The chinchilla coat at the Ali Frazier fight drew attention he couldn't afford. His organization was dismantled. He cooperated with the government and gave up corrupt cops, which made him valuable to prosecutors but a pariah in the criminal world. Frank Lucas proved that innovation and direct sourcing could revolutionize any business, even illegal ones. But his legacy isn't one of success. It's a cautionary tale about how drug money destroys communities, how violence always brings consequences, and how even the smartest criminals eventually fall. He lived to 88 and died peacefully, which is more than most drug kingpins get. But his wealth was gone, his reputation was destroyed, and his community was left to heal from the damage he caused. That's the real Frank Lucas story.